All right, welcome. Welcome everyone to Tarrant County 5 Stones. If you haven't got food, please grab some food. It's amazing this month. It's amazing every month, but today we're celebrating 4th of July coming up. So we do want to give a thank you to Catering to Love for providing it. And I want to give a special thank you to some special helpers that they have today that come from the families of DFW appliance repairs. So, all right. So our spotlight this month is the Poema Foundation, and I'm going to have them come up and tell you a little bit about who they are.
Good morning, y'all. How's everyone doing?
Good.
Good. I'm Natalie Carone. I'm with the Poema Foundation. We are an anti-sex trafficking organization that operates out of Rockwall, Texas. So we operate out of what we call our 3 E's. So that is education, engagement, and empowerment. So to date, we have educated over 31,000 people on human trafficking. We do this for anybody and everybody that wants to learn about human trafficking, because as you all are aware, that's one of the best things that we could equip people with, that education, that awareness of how to recognize human trafficking. So for us, that falls under healthcare providers, teachers, students, all kinds of people, first responders, again, everybody that wants to learn about human trafficking. Let's see. Don't want to lose my spot in my notes. Our 2nd E is engagement. And so this is engaging communities to help out in finding missing kids. So what we do is hand out missing kids posters to surrounding areas. We currently have 17 different campuses in Texas and 1 in South Carolina. The heart behind this ministry is to get people involved in finding missing kids before a trafficker finds them. So as you all are probably aware, there's about a 72-hour short window that a missing kid will hit the streets and a trafficker is likely to approach them. So our heart behind this ministry is to try and get them found before that trafficker approaches them, right? So we're taking these posters to places that missing kids would go, somewhere that's open 24 hours, like a McDonald's, a Walmart, first responders, also places that a trafficker would take a victim. So places like nail salons, beauty supply stores, and things like that. Another part of that ministry is also partnering with For the One, a missing kids organization, to provide them intel while we're out there. So are we seeing signs of traffickers, victims, watchers, anything while we're out and about in the community? We're handing that intel over to For the One to process through those license plates or those suspicious people that we're seeing. Recently, our South Carolina campus, we had a girl that was reported by one of the hotel owners. He had seen her come in week after week being dropped off by an older man. And he looked at that situation and saw something about this is just kind of suspicious to me, but I don't really know what it is. And then the next week, some volunteers brought in our missing kids poster. She was on that poster. And he was able to connect the dots of like, see, I knew something was going wrong here. And so they were able to call in law enforcement and get that girl recovered from a sex trafficking situation. And then our 3rd and final E is empowerment. So we have a safe home, a residential safe house for female adult survivors of sex trafficking. We actually have availability right now. So if you know anyone who fits those criteria and needs a residential program, let us know. We'll be out at the table at the end of the meeting today, and you can find me and we'll talk to you more about that. Thank you so much for listening.
Okay, if anybody is new to our meetings today and you weren't on the sign-in sheet, if you don't mind taking just a second to fill out our quick registration form, we really appreciate that. It helps us keep track of who's here and gets you on the email list. Do we have any agency announcements today?
Good morning, Lindy Borchardt, a human trafficking prosecutor for the Tarrant County District Attorney's Office. Great news to share. About 2 weeks ago, I tried a case before a jury with another prosecutor. Overall, we went forward on 3 first-degree felony drug cases because I was unable to locate many of the victims. And I didn't know how that would work out. And so we prosecuted him, 3 felony first-degree drug cases. Jury came back with guilty on all of those. And you have to remember, it's during voir dire, they just thought they were there on a drug case. So you can only imagine in punishment, in the opening statement, when I get up and say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this defendant is a drug trafficker, but he is also a dramatic pause, walk over, point to the defendant, a child sex trafficker. One of the jurors gasped, oh, and so that was a good start. We were able to present evidence. 2 teenage girls ran away from foster care. And then the CPS investigators started trying to find them, locating sex acts that were being posted. Tarrant County SO did a great job on this case. Sergeant Jarvis went out, they set up a sting operation, responded to the sex act on one of the girls. And they were able to recover at that point. Brandon Williams is a defendant. He came outside of the hotel room and was in his car. The other teenager was not there. Sexual assault examination. And that was so important because one of the victims, we couldn't find anywhere. She's run away, so she wasn't available to testify. We were able, Raul Rodriguez is my great investigator, did a very good job on this case. We found the second victim. She was on felony probation for drugs. And so that, her credibility was a little bit at issue. There was also a bottom, Jessica Campbell, and I indicted her as the bottom because although she was probably a victim of Brandon's because he had her strung out on meth every day, she was also recruiting, she was posting the sex act, she was teaching them the rules of prostitution. So I indicted her, I flipped her, got her testimony, and she testified against Brandon. Again, though, credibility somewhat at issue. The second victim came in, and guys, she is struggling to this day. She has bipolar disorder, not medicated, has a 5-month-old baby. She's terrified of the defendant, and I knew I could not provide her the support she needed. So I reach out to Unbound Now and say, hey guys, this is 2 weeks before the trial. I really need your help on this. And Unbound Now, Randy did a phenomenal job. She met with her. She went back to the west side, the victim did. Randy was able to get her to her dad's house, brought her to court with that baby, and did a phenomenal job. There is no way she would have testified but for Unbound Now. And that's a kind of care coordination that I think Tarrant County does such a great job with, and we all work hard to be a part of that. And I did not know in my opening statement, did not even mention the victim because I didn't know she was going to show up, much less what she was going to say. And sure enough, she took the stand and she did phenomenal. She found courage, she found her voice through her Unbound advocate, and she did so great. Defense attorney did not ask her one question. So we wrapped it up. Jury was out approximately 13 minutes, came back 99 years. Yay. And a $2,000 fine. He is 41, so he will stay in prison for quite some time. He deserves each and every year that the jury sentenced him to. So with that, I'm just proud of being in Tarrant County. We have so much going on. And again, that care coordination piece and the victim informed, how we approach these cases in a victim informed manner. And it all came together and justice was served not only to the defendant, but I'm more proud to say to the victim. And Unbound is still guiding her on her journey to healing. So with that, go team and thank you.
That's a hard one to follow, but I'm excited to share with all of you. My name is Paola Chavez. I'm with Unbound Now, and I'd like to invite you to our Not in My Hotel outreach event on July 20th, where we will do a hotel out. Thank you, Jennifer. hotel outreach, where we'll learn about the intersection of the hospitality industry and human trafficking, and then go out in teams to hotels to bring them awareness about this. So if you're interested, there's flyers up here. It's July 20th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. We'll also have a feature from Fort Worth PD, which we're very excited about. So please come and enjoy some light breakfast and also just information about this. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna go into our law enforcement updates. We'll start with Fort Worth PD and Detective Austin.
Hey guys. So I'm Detective Austin with the Fort Worth Police Department. I work in our human trafficking unit. This month we've had about 4 cases for this, and we've had about 2 tips. One of the cases I was going to talk about is one of mine. It's been a massage parlor. We've done undercover operations on that, got the girls performing acts, and we got it linked to the guy that owns the business and the wife. They're running the deal there. It's definitely been a good operation. Officer Benavidez, he comes from Vice. We've been utilizing Vice, doing those undercover operations and figuring out the inner workings, got all the ledger books. It's definitely been a big case. Alicia said I have a few minutes to discuss something that I can take a few minutes to discuss what I like. So these cases are very good, but I would like to take those few moments to talk about somebody that's really shined, because I come from about 18 years of law enforcement all over Fort Worth. I've done a lot of felony arrests. I've been in some pretty bad situations throughout my career. I come from gun violence, which is over here. I did that for 3 years, investigate shootings and violent crime, gang members. So somebody has shined a lot in the human trafficking field. So I wanted to give attention to her. It's Emma Forson. So when I first came over to human trafficking, yes, no, she needs a round of applause. So it's stuck in my law enforcement world. We get kind of inundated with just police. We get used to just being around each other, a little buddy Benny. So we go into bad situations, houses, felony arrest, people with guns. I've been shot at. I've been horrible situations. We get used to just being around each other. So for somebody new to come into our world and to help us to the degree that she has really stuck out to me. So it's to the point now where I get a case, I go straight to Emma. I ask her, what does she think? What's going on with this kid? What's the deal? Because she knows everything about it. First time I ever met her, because I came in December of 2023. First time I ever met her was through a phone call. She just called me and had all this information about this kid and telling me what I need to do on the investigation and telling me, hey, you need to ask this question, you need to do this. And I was, who are you? That's how we met. And that is Emma's style. She loves these kids. The amount of information, she don't even need her computer. It's absolutely insane. I'll tell her kid's name. She knows all the history. She'll tell me the CPS history. She gives me all the reports. She gives me everything I ever need for my cases, to the point to where she's just invaluable. I don't know how human trafficking would function without that lady right there. It's to that level for me. So we need another round of applause for her. And she doesn't get recognized. She calls me 8 o'clock at night and she's yelling at me because things need to get done. They need to be done now. And she's right. So she's up, but she doesn't get paid for that. So at 8 o'clock at night, when she's on the phone with me and she's coordinating SANE exams, y'all probably know that there's sexual assault exams for children. She's setting that up at the hospital for me. She is doing my forensic interviews, coordinating that, telling me who's going to show up, arguing with those people because they don't want to come in. She fights that fight for me, so takes all that off my plate so I can focus on what I need to do. And she's not being paid for that. So Emma, I notice what you're doing. We notice what you're doing and we do appreciate it. You're invaluable to us, okay? All right, we appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
All right, next we'll hear from Tarrant County Sheriff's Office and Investigator Estrada. Forward, Investigator Hayward.
Good luck following me.
Hey, everybody, I'm Investigator Hayward, Tarrant County Sheriff's Office in the Human Trafficking Unit. Since our last meeting here, we participated in various different operations throughout the city. Our first operation since this last meeting was in May. towards the end of May, Arlington PD posted a online solicitation of a minor operation. That op ended with about 16 total arrests. At least 3 of those arrests were solicitation or prostitution under the age of 18. The suspects that were arrested were under the assumption that they were going to have sexual contact with a female that was at least 15 or 16 years old. After that, during the week of June 10th, the Department of Public Safety hosted a 2-day operation. Same type of operation. No, actually, this one was a John op. This one, let's see, this one ended with about 6 total arrests, and at least 2 of those ended with solicitation of prostitution under the age of 18 as well. 2 days later, we assisted Denton County Sheriff's Office in their John operation as well. That one ended with a very high profile arrest. The Denton County Fire Chief was actually arrested during that operation. Let's see. As of now, we just have various other operations that are planned out throughout this month, along with different trainings that we have scheduled that are currently local and out of state as well. So next month I'll have more updates for you. Thank you.
I'm excited to introduce our speaker today. Katia Gonzalez is the Director of Training and Team Relations at Alliance for Children. Katia began her career in the field of child advocacy in 2010 as an investigator with the Department of Family and Protective Services, where she worked as part of a multidisciplinary team investigating the most severe allegations regarding sexual and physical abuse, neglect, and child fatalities. In 2015, Katia took a position with Alliance for Children and has served in various roles, dedicating her time to serve the mission of protecting Tarrant County children from child abuse through her efforts in providing prevention education to the community. Excited to welcome Katia Gonzalez.
Okay, so I think Felicia could have just said, I work with Emma and support her as much as I can. So that was enough introduction, but thank you for that. So for this portion, I think I have you for about 40 minutes. I wanted to share some information about Alliance for Children and how we work together as a multidisciplinary team to serve child abuse victims, which of course includes human trafficking. How many of you have probably heard of Alliance for Children, but how many of you maybe are not sure about all the intricacies of all that we do? Okay, so there's several of you. Some of you are in my office and work with us on a regular basis, so this might be just a brief review. But Alliance for Children is a children's advocacy center. So if you're not in Tarrant County, chances are you'll have a children's advocacy center within your county that does similar work. It might just look a little bit different based on kind of our communities and how the needs of those communities. But here in Tarrant County, we have these 3 locations. This is our closest location in Fort Worth. We have a location in Arlington. And we have a location in Hearst. As you know, Tarrant County is really widely spread, so we want to make sure that families that need us have really easy access to us. So that's kind of our locations. If you're interested in visiting us and seeing a tour, and getting a tour, you're welcome for that as well. Just feel free to reach out to that. Okay, so as I mentioned, we're a children's advocacy center. In a nutshell, our job is to serve child abuse victims. We do that in a variety of ways. So let me share kind of why we exist before we talk about all of the services that we do. So we work together as a multidisciplinary team to serve child abuse victims. Back before Alliance for Children and organizations like that existed, the process would be for say a child came to school and said they were sexually abused. What would be that teacher's responsibility at that point? They would make a report, right? So typically they would call Child Protective Services. There would be an investigation to make sure that that child was safe, that child would be interviewed. We know that sexual abuse, trafficking, all of that is also against the law. So then we know that law enforcement is always involved as well. So before we existed, the process would be for CPS to be involved. Then there might be a criminal investigation. So there might be prosecutors involved. There might be doctors involved. So what we realized is having all of these groups and entities is really important. We want to make sure that that child is safe and protected and gets justice. But what we also realized is oftentimes before children's advocacy centers existed, children would have to be interviewed about their trauma multiple times to get that information. And there wasn't really a great system for us to work together. So we also found situations where we work together in silos. So I have this picture up here just to illustrate. So how kind of we come to be. So there was a trial, a kiddo that was going to trial. I want to say she was very young, like maybe 6 years old. And she was sexually abused by her grandfather. So they went to trial. That guy like went to jail for many, many years. And afterwards, everybody was high-fiving and celebrating like, gosh, like that guy went to jail and that kid is safe now. And then that prosecutor like kind of reviewed that case and realized like, yes, we got this justice, we got what was needed, but that child was traumatized as a result of that because she had to be interviewed multiple times. That family didn't really have a great system of like of support for them. So we had to be better. We had to be better in that. So that's how Children's Advocacy Center came to be. So in cases, and you guys can kind of read right here, in a nutshell, in cases where there's a criminal component, where there's a crime against a child, and you guys can kind of read that here, what qualifies for that, we come together as a team. So we no longer have these silos. Alliance for Children, like you saw, 3 centers. We have law enforcement and child protective services that are housed with us, and we have an entire team set up to make sure that we're working together as a team. Including, I know for this group, including child sex trafficking and labor trafficking, as you heard Detective Austin talk about the coordination of that. So this is our team. So number one, we want law enforcement for justice with that. We work together with child protective services and kind of their groups and that they contract with. We work together with prosecutors. So Lindy is a great partner within that. We also have lots of opportunity to work with juvenile services because a lot of our families and our children participate with that group as well. We have in Tarrant County, we're really lucky to have multiple hospitals and multiple hospital systems that work together to provide medical care for the children that need it. And then our job with Alliance for Children is to facilitate that teamed approach, the coordination of all of those services, which I'll talk about in a little bit, to make sure that that happens properly. Okay. Probably the first time children come through our centers, it's usually for that investigative piece. And we have, we call them forensic interviewers that are on staff to interview children that need that. So that is done in a very specialized ways. So that is to support the investigative process. So we no longer have a need for children to be interviewed multiple times, but they're also experts in what they do. So this is what they do for a living. They're highly trained in child development and how children make disclosures. And they're also a huge resource for us in the courtroom. So they're experts that can provide expert testimony in how those interviews take place. So this is an example, like this is, I know in our world, like we always want to be confidential of clients. So this is not a client. This is actually an adult that looks like a kid. It's just used for the purposes of this picture to illustrate to you guys. But that is what a forensic interview looks like. And then while that is happening with a forensic interviewer, who again is very specialized in how to do that, we have investigators that watch that live to ensure that if there is any missing information in the moment, then they're able to get that clarified information for their case. Okay. So beyond that, so that investigative piece and the coordination of that is very important. So we want to make sure that we do that in a very trauma-informed way. But we also want to make sure that after something really terrible has happened to a child and family, that they have the best possible outcome up to that. So that again kind of requires a teamed effort in that. So we have a family advocacy team that's there for protective caregivers to help them like walk them through that process. So that might be some case management. It might be helping them fill out crime victim compensation forms, being a liaison between kind of investigation and the family. So they do a lot of that kind of very customized work. And then we also have very special programs within that to support families that need that. So again, sometimes that might be financial support. Sometimes if families have to go to court, we want to make sure that's also a stressful process that can be traumatic for children that might have to testify. So we have a court accompaniment program that goes along with that. And with that, like I just love sharing that story because it's heartwarming to me. So I hope you find it the same. So we've had that program for quite a while. And then several years ago, we had a kiddo that had to testify in court. Her mom could not be in a courtroom with her because she also had to testify. But her mom gave her this little necklace that just said like, this is, even though I'm not there in the courtroom with you, like this necklace is a symbol that you're not alone, that we're all here for you. So like very touched, like
heartwarming portion for that child to make her feel a little bit more comfortable. So after she testified, did a great job testifying, but this little girl gave that necklace to our prosecutor, who's now a judge, and said like, hey, can you give that to the next person that has to do the same so that they also don't feel alone in that? So yeah, oh yeah, exactly right. Which of course is like if you look at it from a victim perspective, like this is the kiddo that had to go through this process, but also wanted to get back. So of course we had to capitalize on that. So now that's what we do. We like recreated this necklace, and now that's something that we share with every kiddo that has to testify, to again like share that story of like you're not the only one that has had to do that, and you have all of the support surrounding you. So that's just one example of kind of that family advocacy and how we come together to make sure that children are supported from like that first step of investigation when a report comes in, all the way to prosecution as long as they need it, and sometimes beyond prosecution as well. So like a lot of special programs we have a back to school program to help support children. We have a Christmas program for families in need that extra support. Our makeover project is also a really special program to me. Is, as you guys know, I'm probably teaching to the choir a little bit, but children can be victimized by strangers. Like, yes, that does happen, but most of the time they're victimized by somebody that they know, somebody that they trust, and somebody that's oftentimes in their home. So when we have those situations, we're offering all these services to children, like we're getting them into counseling, we're supporting them as much as we can. But if they're going back to that same environment where they were abused, like you can imagine how re-traumatizing that is. So in those situations, when we're noticing that is happening, we'll just have a group of volunteers, a group of donors that like provide all the supplies, and we'll go back and change that space. So if they got victimized in their bedroom and that's hard for them to like go back to that space again, we'll like go paint the wall colors and change the comforters and whatever is needed to make sure that that child is like has a new space. And we've had to be creative with that. We had a child that was victimized in a car, so we couldn't get them a new car. Unfortunately, that would be great. But we had to like really think creatively, like, can we reupholster it? Can we add some new spaces to that to where that's a different environment for them? So you guys are kind of seeing like that trauma aspect of that. Like when something happens, we want to make sure that we're coming together with that. And then beyond that, we provide clinical services at no cost to families. So that might look different for each child. We have group therapy, we have individual therapy. These are our therapy bunnies. I'm told they're like to be a therapy animal, you have to be certified. They're not certified, but they do bring a lot of like comfort to children. So they're not technical therapy bunnies, but they do bring comfort. And then this is an example of like some therapy rooms that we might have for younger kiddos that are doing maybe play therapy, that are too young to really have the other forms with that. And that might be an example of for older kids if they're doing other forms of therapy with that. Okay. So let me get into kind of Emma's portion. So thank you for queuing me up for that. That was wonderful. So all of these resources are available to families. And like that was something that has been like in Tarrant County, we have been doing that since 1992. So we've been providing that care. But then also we realized that children have access to these services, but we also were missing some. Because there wasn't that like fluid coordination with that. So about 5 years ago, I might be wrong on the dates, but several years ago, we started a multidisciplinary team coordination program. So now we actually have a group of coordinators that review every single Child Protective Services report that comes in Tarrant County. And we like read it through and make sure that there's not any children or families that are falling through the cracks. So if we're identifying a case that meets that criteria of a child that's been sexually abused, that like witnessed a violent crime, that law enforcement needs to be involved in that case, then we're immediately starting coordination with that. So if we're identifying a case like, gosh, they called Child Protective Services because that child was trafficked, but a law enforcement report was never made. So we'll go through and we'll make that law enforcement report. So that's kind of Emma's job. Like if she identifies that case, she'll immediately reach out to law enforcement to make sure that that process is started. So again, to make sure that children are not falling through the cracks within that. Okay, I'm going to skip that because that's overwhelming. So I'll go through that in a different format. But essentially, like this is kind of how the flow of what we work. So for entity coordination, so we go through, I'm gonna stand over here so I can kind of go through this. We review every single law enforcement reports, like some we have law enforcement access to or DFPS reports. We schedule forensic interviews to make sure that that's a really fluid process, that kids can come to us as fast as possible, rather than like relying on other people to coordinate that for us. We connect partners. So like, again, if we notice law enforcement is involved, but the family is actually not really being really protective of that child, we need to make sure CPS is involved as well. So we'll coordinate those aspects of that. And then we provide kind of the coordination of services to make sure that kids that might like benefit from a family advocate or might benefit from therapy, that we're starting that process to make sure that children are connected with that. So that is available to all cases and all children that meet that criteria of coming to a children's advocacy center. So it looks a little bit different with human trafficking cases, with child sex trafficking. So we only serve kids. So it looks a little bit different because we know that with sex trafficking, there's a lot of complexities that are involved with that. So those kids need our support in a greater capacity. So we have a kind of a process in how we handle coordination of trafficking cases. We call it care coordination in Tarrant County. Again, that's kind of spread throughout different counties as well. But again, it's all of this. So all of the work that we would typically do, but we also want to be more intentional whenever we have like a kid that's just recovered in a hotel room, for example. We want to make sure that we're getting the ball rolling to make sure that that child has access to all the services very quickly. So that could be, we're calling Cook Children's Hospital to get a SANE exam, and we're having conversations with a forensic interviewer to see what's needed first, like to address all the immediate needs of that family in that moment, to make sure that that child is getting the proper care. So anytime that we also know that with our trafficking kiddos, they don't often stay in the same county. So like, and they have multiple jurisdictions that are often like have touched base with that child because they're going to different cities and different counties. So we also work really closely with other children's advocacy centers to where like they probably know us by cell phones and by names, by faces. We see them kind of on a fairly regular basis, but we also kind of help that coordinated approach, even if that child is not within our jurisdiction. So that's been a huge help with that. And then continuing to follow that kid. We have a every other month we have a staffing where we'll go through and talk about all the kiddos that are on our caseload per se, and make sure that they're still doing okay. Like, where are they? Like, are they engaging in services? Do they have a CSA advocate? So making sure that we're following those kids throughout to make sure that they're okay and that there's not anything else we can do for them. Any questions about that so far? Okay, I'll keep moving. Okay, so this is a little bit preachy, but stay with me. So like, I'm sure you guys are thinking like, gosh, that sounds really great. How can I make sure that child abuse is prevented? How we can support? So this is misleading. I'm not asking you to donate or attend one of our events, but I just kind of brought that up. In prevention of that. So in Tarrant County, as you guys can kind of see on the screen here, we have quite a bit of child abuse in our community. So if you look at that number right here, in 2023, we had about over 5,000 confirmed victims of abuse. So that means somebody made a report to Child Protective Services, there was an investigation, and then there was enough evidence to confirm that yes, abuse occurred. So if you can imagine, that's probably a pretty small portion of the actual abuse that happens in our community. So our goal within Tarrant County and with Alliance for Children is, yes, we want to make sure that those kids that need us are coming to us, but gosh, wouldn't it be great if they didn't need our services? If there was if we can really mitigate the need for children needing our services. And again, more statistics here. So we serve about 2,300 of those. And as you can tell, most of the time that abuse happens by somebody that child knows and trusts. Just a fun tidbit, just because I think it's interesting. So this year, our stranger danger kind of unknown is 12%. When I first started this work, it used to be about 5 to 2% was somebody that was victimized by somebody that's a stranger. So over the years, that keeps rising and rising and rising. So anybody want to venture a guess of why that is? Social media. Yeah, absolutely. The more access perpetrators have to kids, like the more abuse and victimization that we see. So to us, we would consider that person like a child that met somebody on Instagram. We would consider them a stranger or somebody that's an online acquaintance. But to that kid, that's not a stranger to them. That's a friend they met online. That's somebody they developed a relationship with. So it's just more access for people to have to children. So as you guys are like in your communities, as you're working to prevent abuse, make sure that kids are safe, that online aspect needs to be something that we consider as well. Okay. I'm going to show you guys this video. I'm looking at the time. I still have time. So hope it plays, and then we'll kind of talk through some of that.
The term ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And these are stressful or traumatic experiences that happen in childhood that can increase the risk for significant health, mental health, and behavioral consequences later in life. They really come from a big landmark research study that was done by the CDC and Kaiser now more than 20 years ago, in which they asked adults about their history of 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences. And these include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, or growing up in a household where a parent experienced mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, where there was parental separation or divorce, or intimate partner violence. What they found was, number one, ACEs are super common, and number two, that there's this really significant effect. So there's a direct, what we call a dose-response relationship between adverse childhood experiences and some of the most significant and serious health conditions that are facing Americans today. 2/3 of individuals had experienced at least one, and 1 in 8 folks had experienced 4 or more. When we talk about how many of us have experienced ACEs, what we see is that ACEs impact every community, every demographic group, but it impacts our vulnerable communities in a disproportionate level. The big surprise about the ACE study was that for someone with 4 more ACEs, their risk of heart disease was double, right? For stroke and cancer and liver disease and diabetes, even autoimmune disease. And a lot of these things are things that we didn't kind of traditionally or intuitively associate with childhood trauma. But now we can use this science to understand actually what happens in our brains and bodies when we're exposed to trauma or adversity, and especially in childhood. The term, the toxic stress response, actually refers to the prolonged activation of our body's stress response, the release of all those stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol and all of those things that go along with our stress response. And then also the ways in which that affects our bodies. Children are especially vulnerable to this repeated activation of the stress response because their brains and bodies are just developing. So high doses of adversity in children actually changes the way their brains develop. It changes the way their hormonal systems develop, their immune system develops, and even the way their DNA is read and transcribed. And those long-term changes are what we refer to as the toxic stress response. One of the things that's really challenging about ACEs is that they tend to repeat in families, generation after generation. And I will say this as someone who has experienced my fair share of ACEs. Understanding how that might be impacting me and being able to recognize that, for me, is really the key for being able to do things differently. When we understand what happens in our bodies with the toxic stress response, and we understand that it's that prolonged activation of our stress response, then step one is really understanding what are the things that help to regulate our stress response. And immediately at that point, we begin decreasing the harm that happened as a result of our past experiences. So things like mindfulness, right? Meditation, spending time in nature, mental health interventions, regular exercise, nutritional strategies, and my favorite, healthy relationships. All of these things are really scientifically demonstrated to help to regulate the biological stress response, and they improve our outcomes for those of us who have experienced ACEs. These nurturing relationships, they feel good, which is good, of course, but they literally change our biology. When we have safe, stable, and nurturing relationships in our lives, it improves our neurologic functioning, it improves our hormonal regulation, it improves our immune functioning, and these social supports are critical part of healing. If we all understand our role in being a source of buffering care to a young person in need, that is truly transformative. ACEs Aware is a first-in-the-nation effort to train our healthcare providers how to screen for adverse childhood experiences and how to respond in an evidence-based, trauma-informed way that helps to improve outcomes for children and adults. ACEs are not destiny. Even if someone has experienced significant ACEs, it doesn't mean that they are absolutely going to have these negative outcomes. Recognizing our ACEs requires us to recognize our vulnerability. And that can be really scary. But it also is the place where we get a chance to ask for what we need. I deeply believe that we can cut ACEs and toxic stress by half in one generation.
How many of you have seen that video before, have heard of ACEs? So several of you have, and I know this is Dr. Berg, so she kind of is the poster child for adverse childhood experiences, and she comes from a medical perspective. But the reason I showed this video is because ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, also leaves our kids at risk for human trafficking. So I will say it's been, like, to be honest, like, it's been maybe 2 months or 3 months that I've looked through all of our cases where we had sex trafficking kiddos or survivors of sex trafficking. And at that time, 100% of them were sexual abuse victims prior to that. And all of them also have a lot of other adverse childhood experiences. So we do really great work, I believe, in Tarrant County to serve survivors of trafficking. But gosh, if we can really think in that upstream effect of how do we make sure that we're covering kids that are going through hard times or are in hard places or are experiencing those adverse childhood experiences, if we can really meet them there and make sure that we're providing that proper care and those nurturing relationships, that can really impact a lot of our prevention work and what we see with that. And I know, as I'm looking here in the room, you guys already do a lot of that. You do a lot of that prevention work. So thank you for doing that. It makes a big difference with that. But the other thing that we really want, if we're thinking about prevention of trafficking, is we want to make sure that kids have access to our services. So at Alliance for Children, we have the MDT coordination team, but all of our cases services come from law enforcement or child protective services. So we need community members to make sure that kids have access to us. So we need them to, number one, make reports, but also be properly trained on how to recognize signs that something might be occurring, and how to address that appropriately. And one of the best ways, probably the easiest ways, is for kids to be able to tell us if something is happening. So if we can really like shore that up to where kids feel comfortable talking to us. And we talk a lot about why kids don't feel comfortable talking to us, but probably for purposes of today, it would be more helpful to talk about like how we can encourage that. So that screen right here talks about some research base. It's from 2020, but that's been consistent every year that they've redone that research. But now, like, most important thing is we want to make sure that kids have access to trusted adults, and we don't want to assume that those trusted adults are going to be their family members. So if we as a community can like really provide that care for kids, like making sure that we're training them. So I'm looking at Sonia, she's at the front. She does a lot of prevention education in the community alongside Alliance for Children and others to teach kids what's okay and what's not okay. Kind of like a lot of times kids are just going through a lot of emotional distress and they need somebody to help them with that. They want something to be done about that. And really important one is expecting to be believed. Like, how many times do we have kids that are like, well, I don't tell anybody because the first time I tried, they didn't believe me. So I'm not sure that anybody will believe if something happens. So we want to make sure that we're building a community where kids feel comfortable, kind of understanding some of, like, for adults to understand some of those dynamics. So when kids are saying something, it's like, gosh, that could never happen. He's such a nice guy, that we really kind of have the proper training to recognize that, yeah, that things happen and it happens in our community as well. And then this one is being asked. I don't mean of like that we should be going to kids and saying like, hey, is anybody trafficking you? Are you being abused in some way? Like, that might not be really appropriate. And that might be fishing and coaching a kid. But being asked is kind of recognizing some of the dynamics that might be risky behaviors. So kind of going back to that, if you guys are looking, if you guys scan that, we have like access to lots of trainings to kind of help us recognize if abuse might be occurring. I'm seeing you guys scanning. I can go back to that at a later point if we need to, but that's just on our website. But if we can really make sure that our community is properly trained in how to recognize that. So when you're noticing those like concerning behaviors, if our kid is running away multiple times, or if there's just concerning behaviors, that we're all properly trained, and then can follow up with like, hey, I noticed like XYZ is happening. Tell me what's going on. So it's just asking them in the terms that we're like, hey, we're here, we're recognizing the care, and we're asking you and providing that opportunity to tell us if something's happening. And then beyond that, kind of creating that environment where kids feel safe, they feel protected. So responding in a trauma-informed way to make sure that we're supporting them. So that's kind of what creates that environment where children are like, yes, I have trusted adults. I have this environment where I feel safe, I feel protected. So that kind of helps them open up a little bit more about what's going on in their lives. Okay, so again, that aspect of community education is really important. So we at Alliance for Children are like really that preventative effort. We talk to kids about what's okay and what's not okay. So we have programs and curriculums in Tarrant County that's accessible to kids. We talk to professionals, we talk to parents and caregivers. Like, all of that is really important in the community if we really want to be upstream and how we can prevent kids that are needing our services. Hi, and thank you. Does anybody have any questions? Hi. Yes, ma'am.
So Texas law has changed so that they now recognize individuals with disabilities and intellectual disabilities as being very similar to people under the age of 18.
Yes.
Do you guys work with that population?
We do. That's a great question. Thank you for asking that. So for those that didn't hear, like maybe virtually, is like we also recognize that children or adults with disabilities also like operate on a different level that's not as in a cognitive level on an adult level. I did not say it as clearly or as articulately as you did. But yeah, so Alliance for Children, like we do serve children, but we also serve adults that either like have complex trauma where we feel like that forensic interview or the extra support would be really beneficial to them. Or if they have developmental delays or cognitive delays, we'll also provide services to adults as well in that capacity. Yeah. Yeah.
First of all, you guys are amazing.
Thank you.
Prayers. That's what we talk.
Thank you.
And back to the slide, I want to go back to it on
Yep.
the one where who the perpetrators are. And you made a note of the change. Yeah, you made a note of the change of a stranger note. I wondered if you've seen any other trends you could comment on
I think that online solicitation cases tend to be the strongest with that, but over the years, like our numbers like stay fairly the same. So it's usually family members that are abusing kids is what we typically see. I know around COVID times, like we saw a big trend within that where we got a whole lot less abuse cases in general because kids didn't have access to trusted adults that would report for them. But on the other hand, what we saw was like an extreme, the complexity of cases and the violence of cases greatly increased. So meaning we got a lot more cases with fatalities, with like really serious physical harm to children because they were in unsafe environments where law enforcement was responding or kids were going to hospitals. So that increased significantly, but then like the overall reports decreased. And then we also kind of saw like after kids returned to school, we were all prepared for that. We knew this would happen. We saw like a huge uptick in just abuse cases in general because kids were coming back to school. They were talking about what was going on in their lives with trusted adults. And then it kind of evened out from that. So that's the biggest trend that I can think of. And then that trend in online solicitation cases, but overall we're like tend to stay the same. Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Burke. I think it was understanding ACEs, so understanding adverse childhood experiences. Yeah. Did you have a question?
Do you work with unaccompanied minors across the border, or could you comment on? I know that there was something that came out where that was
Yeah, we don't like in Tarrant County, we don't see a whole lot of that. Like not to say that we've never had that, but our criteria is still the same. So if we had an unaccompanied minor and we have concerns that they've been abused in some way, or if they have concerns of trafficking, like of course that meets that criteria of us serving that. But I don't know if y'all have any kind of like seen any trends within that with cases that you guys get with unaccompanied minors.
Not necessarily minors, but younger adults.
Yeah. So more with adults is where we see it with that. Okay. Yeah.
Katia, on the sibling, step sibling, have you guys seen any increase in that? Because in the last couple of years, we've been talking about the connection between access of children or children having access to child pornography. And because of that, kids are now starting to act those things out on sometimes younger siblings. So have you guys seen an increase in that?
Not in like several years. I don't think like it's been like over the years, like it changes a little bit by statistics, but nothing that's significant because kids have had access to like child or pornography in general, probably for several years with kind of however long we've had the internet, so like kids would have access to that. But it is kind of a population that we tend to not think about. It's like when we do trainings that people are more shocked about, we get a fairly significant amount of juvenile offenders. And some of them are offenders to where like it's a clear, like this is a victim and this is a very intentional perpetrator and he happens to be a juvenile or she happens to be a juvenile. But a lot of also what we see, which actually I will say that there's a little bit of a trend with that is juveniles kind of engaging in risky behaviors. So it might be like a girlfriend boyfriend relationship, but then she sent some images that were inappropriate and those got like disseminated across the school. So we're seeing a lot of that again, like relates to social media, relates to kind of internet access, and kids are just like, think that they're just being kids and doing things that are just kid things, but it's actually a crime. Like we can't do that. That's against the law. So we do see several of those with kids engaging in things they shouldn't.
An online question.
Okay.
Beyond monetary donations, what can attendees do to further advise your children's reach and effectiveness?
Right, well, monetary donations are always really appreciated, but we do have lots of opportunities. Like one of the biggest and easiest things is just to make sure that we have a community that's properly educated. So we have lots of resources for that. So like I would really suggest if you're not as familiar with this topic, like go to a training to recognize like some signs and symptoms that abuse might be occurring and what to do in those situations. Like make sure that you're prepared and If a child comes and tells you something happened, that you know how to handle that appropriately, that doesn't hurt the investigation and is also not re-traumatizing to a child. So like, that's really important for all of us to know, and we have training opportunities for that. But if you just want to be like, gosh, I already trained and I want to get more involved, we have volunteer opportunities where if we want to engage with kids and really build that community where they feel supported, like if you want to help with the makeover project and things like that, we also have opportunities for that. Yeah. Yeah, I'll go back to the QR code. There you go. So if you guys are interested, all of those opportunities are right there. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you guys for your time and attention. Thank you guys for all you do to support our work. Appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, that was great. And if you guys have any other questions that come up, feel free to email me and I will get you in contact with her. Thank you for coming out today, and we'll see you all next month.